And welcome to English ESL Way with Mithika, and today we are going to study a new chapter. So let's get started. Okay, tell me, do you like war? Does anybody like war? I guess no. Nobody wants war. Nobody likes to fight in a war. In my opinion, if two nations sit together and find a solution instead of fighting with each other, they could save a lot of lives. That's exactly the thought has been reflected in this chapter, The Best Christmas Present in the World. But before moving on, I would like to introduce to its author, Sir Michael Morpurgo is an English author, playwright, poet, lyricist. His work is best known for writing children's novels. His work is noted for magical storytelling, for characters, for relationship with nature, for vivid settings, and same you'll find in the story that we are going to read today. It is one of the Morpurgo stories about the backdrop of World War I. In this story, the author finds a letter written many years ago by a soldier to his wife at the war camp. In this, he is describing his experiences about the situations there, mentioning about how easily enemies can become friends and promising her to be back home by Christmas. So the author goes in search of the letter's rightful owner, who, on receiving the letter, mistook author as her long-awaited husband. So let's find out the answer to the question, what is the best Christmas present, the letter or the mistook identity? Are you interested to know? So let's read it. I spotted in a junk shop in Bridport a roll-top desk. I've always wanted one, but they are far too expensive. So the narrator went to a junk shop in Bridport. Bridport is a market town in Dorset, England, looking for a roll-top desk which he wanted to buy for a long time, but he couldn't buy any because he found them expensive. It was early 19th century and it was in bad condition, the roll-top in several pieces, one leg clumsily mended, scotch marks all down one side. So he found one which was made of oak and very old. So while he was looking over that desk before buying, he found it was in bad condition. He found the table rolled up into several pieces and the leg was clumsily mended, and on one side there were scotch marks. Scotch marks means burn marks, right? But then again, it was going for very little money. I thought I could restore it. It would be a risk, a challenge, but I had to have it. I paid for it. So after looking over the table, he thought whether he should buy. Since it was cheap, author decided to buy, thinking he would repair it. I brought it back to my workroom at the back of my garage. I remember because I began work on it on Christmas Eve. So he brought it. What did he bring? He brought the roll-top desk to his workroom, which was at the back of garage. So where was the workroom? Pause and put your entries in comment box right away. And he began working on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is the evening or the entire day before the Christmas day. There was something in there. I removed the roll-top completely and pulled out the drawers. The veneer had lifted. It looked like water damage. Both fire and water had clearly taken their toll. So when he began working, he removed roll-top completely. Found veneer. Veneer means a thin decorative covering of fine wood applied to a coarser wood to make it more attractive. Look in the picture above. Veneer had also chipped off. Now tell me, why does veneer comes off the furniture? Put your entries in the comment box. And when he was working on the roll-top desk, he concluded that the roll-top was damaged due to fire and water both. And why was it damaged due to fire and water? Well, we'll find out the answer to this question later in the chapter. The last drawer was stuck fast. I tried all I could to ease it out gently. In the end, I used brute force. I struck it sharply with the side of my fist and drawer flew open to reveal a shallow space underneath, a secret drawer. So, he opened all the drawers after he had taken out the damaged cover. But the last one was jammed. So what is the meaning of stuck fast? Yes. Reply quickly in the comment box. So he applied brute force. He hit it hard by striking it sharply with the side of his fist, like the way in the picture. Now, by doing this, the drawer came out and he found a secret drawer underneath. Now, what is the action point here? You need to do an action. You need to strike your table gently, not sharply. Okay, moving on. I reached in and took out a small black tin box. sellotaped. To the top of it was a piece of lined notepaper, written over in a shaky handwriting. So he took out the small tin box and there was a note on it that said, Jim's last letter received January 25, 1950. And it was in a shaky handwriting. It was not in good handwriting. Jim's last letter received January 25, 1950. To be buried with me when the time comes. I knew as I did it that it was wrong of me to open the box, but curiosity got better of my scruples. It usually does. Inside the box there was an envelope. The address read, Mrs. Jim McPherson. So he took out the small tin box and there was a note on it that said Jim's last letter received January 25, 1915, and with the instruction to bury the letter with her. He knew that reading somebody's letter was wrong, but out of curiosity he did it. Now notice the curiosity got better of his scruples phrase here. Curiosity is a feeling and scruple is a hesitation with regard to morality. So if a feeling gets the better of you, you can't stop yourself from allowing that feeling to make you do something despite knowing that what you are doing is wrong. So here you need to share any incident of your life when your curiosity got better of you and you did something wrong, right? So please share that in the comment box, okay? So he, out of curiosity, read that letter which he's supposed not to read that, but he read it, right? I took the letter and unfolded it. It was written in pencil and dated. So he took out that letter, he read it, and he found that the letter was in pencil and dated 26 December 1914. This is the letter, but we'll read it through the pictures. Dearest Connie, I write to you in much happier frame of mind because something wonderful has just happened that I must tell you about at once. So this letter had been written by Mr. Jim McPherson to his wife Connie. While he was writing, he felt ecstatic because wonderful had happened and felt like sharing with his wife. We were all standing in our trenches yesterday morning, Christmas morning. It was crisp and quiet all about. As beautiful a morning as I've ever seen. As cold and frosty as a Christmas morning should be. I should like to be able to tell you that we began it, but the truth, I'm ashamed to say, is that Fritz did. So Jim McPherson was a soldier who was set against Germans during the First World War. And the soldiers on both the sides were in their trenches. Look here, the picture. A long, narrow ditch dug in the ground. This is called a trench. So it was Christmas morning, as Christmas falls in December and days are cold and frosty in December, so as that Christmas morning. He felt ashamed to tell his wife that they had begun that thing. It was the Fritz, means the German soldier, who began it. Let's check what they began. Someone saw a white flag waving from the trenches opposite. Then they were calling out to us from across no man's land, Happy Christmas, Tommy, Happy Christmas. So someone from our side, means from our Britisher side, saw a German soldier waving a white flag. And then he observed that they were calling out the English soldiers. So English soldier's name was Tommy and the German soldier's name here kept as Fritz, right? So they were calling out the English soldiers to say Happy Christmas. Same to you, Fritz, same to you. I thought that would be that and we all did, but then suddenly some of them was up there in his great coat and waving a white flag. And there was another Fritz up on the parapet and another. Keep your heads down, it's a trick. When we had got over the surprise, some of us shouted back. So they also wished in return to the Fritz soldiers that Happy Christmas and Merry Christmas, and they all thought that German soldier wanted to wish them Happy Christmas as it was a Christmas morning. So they also wished in return and they thought that it was all over now. But suddenly what they observed that they had come up to the wall, right? They were not hiding themselves into the trenches, they had come up to the wall, and then another moment they found that there are some more on the parapet. And at this moment the Tommies, means the Britishers, thought that it was their trick, right? And out of some of them, one shouted that don't shoot. Keep your heads down. It may be a trick. They were afraid. But gradually they realized that it was not a trick. So they also wished them in return. This time there were dozens of them walking towards us across no man's land and not a rifle between them. One of the German is waving a bottle above his head. Come on, boys, what are you waiting for? We have schnapps, we have sausage, we meet you. Yes. There was no stopping them. I was the officer. I should have stopped them there and then, I suppose. But the truth is that it never even occurred to me I should. All along their line and ours, I could see men walking slowly towards one another, grey coats, khaki coats, meeting in the middle. And I was one of them. I was part of this. In the middle of the war, we were making peace. You can't imagine, dearest Connie, my feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer, who approached me, hand outstretched. He gripped my hand warmly. So about 12 soldiers started coming towards them in no man's land. Initially, Jim was apprehensive, yet he made no efforts to stop them. They shared schnapps, sausages, and he was rather happy that they were celebrating happiness with his enemy soldiers. He further added that he liked the way the German officer came towards him and introduced him, gripped his hand warmly. So who came to Jim McPherson? His reply, Hans Wolf, I'm from Dusseldorf. I play the cello in orchestra. Happy Christmas. I'm Jim. Happy Christmas to you too, mate. I'm school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Ah, Dorset, he smiled. I know this place. I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage, and we talked, Connie. How we talked? He spoke almost perfect English. But it turned out that he had never set foot in Dorset, never even been to England. He had learned all he knew of England from school and from reading books in English. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy, his favorite book, Far From the Madding Crowd. So, out there in no man's land, we talked of Bathsheba and Gabrielloch and Sergeant Trow and Dorset. He had a wife and one son, born just 6 months ago. The Fritz soldiers who approached to Jim McPherson was Hans Wolf. He was from Dusseldorf, and he told that he played cello in the orchestra, and he wished Jim McPherson Happy Christmas. And in reply, he also wished him Happy Christmas and told him that he was a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. He was amazed to tell Connie that they talked in English. He was surprised to see a Dusseldorf mean a German speaking English and knew about Dorset, which is in England, where he never come. So pose and tell, how did he speak good English? Yes, the source of information was from reading English books. He had read about that place in Hardy's novel Far From Madding Crowd. And they discussed about the other books, their favorites, and Hans Wolf family. As I looked about me, there were huddles of khaki and grey everywhere, all over no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating. There never was a Christmas party like it, Connie. Hans Wolf and I shared what was left of your wonderful Christmas cake, Connie. He thought that the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. I agreed. We agreed about everything. He was my enemy. So further he mentioned that when he looked around, he found that the soldiers from both the sides were in numbers sitting together, smoking, laughing, drinking and feasting. And then he offered the left part of the Connie's cake to Hans Wolf, and Hans Wolf said that he liked the marzipan, the sweet covering on Jim's cake. And he wrote that he had never seen or imagined a Christmas party like that. And he also mentioned that they agreed about everything despite he was his enemy. Then someone, I don't know who, brought out a football. Grey coats and guns were dumped in piles to make goalposts, and the next thing we knew that it was Tommy against Fritz, out in the middle of no man's land. So in an attempt to make peace, then he himself didn't know that who brought that football, but one of the Fritz soldiers brought out a football, and then they put aside their coats and their guns to make a goalpost, and in a while they were in a football match. Hans Wolf and I looked on and cheered, clapping our hands, stomping our feet to keep out the cold as much as anything. So Jim McPherson, who was the officer in command from British side, and Hans Wolf from the other, they were watching the match. They were not playing, they were cheering, they were clapping, and they were stomping their feet to keep themselves warm in cold Christmas morning. Actually, what happens is during the cold days, if you do not do anything and you remain idle, you feel more cold. Jim McPherson, I think this is how we should resolve this war. A football match. No one dies in a football match. No children are orphaned. No wives become widows. I would prefer cricket. Then we Tommies could be sure of winning probably. There was a moment when I noticed our breaths mingling in the air between us. He saw it too and smiled. We laughed at that. So while they were talking, Henswolf, addressing Jim, suggested that a football match was the best way to resolve the war, because in this war no one dies, no children become orphans, and no wives become widows. And Jim McPherson agreed with Henswolf, but said that it would be better if we play cricket, as it was their national game and they could be sure of winning. Now look above in this picture. Have you ever noticed during winter days this thing same happens with you also? When you breathe, you can see that out. So same happened with Henswolf and Jim McPherson. Their breaths were mingling and they laughed at this thing. And together we watched the game. Sad to say, Connie, Fritz won 2-1. But as Henswolf generously said, your goal's wider than ours, so it isn't quite fair. So then we continued to watch the match together, and the game was won by Germans, and to his surprise, Henswolf admitted that their goals were wider than theirs. The time came, and all too soon, when the game was finished, the schnapps and the rum and the sausage had long since run out, and we knew it was all over. I wish you well and hope the fighting would end and you would see your family again soon, and we could all go home. I think that's what every soldier wants on both sides. Take care, Henswolf. I shall never forget this moment, nor you. So the game was finished, so did the drinks and cakes. Soldiers of both sides bade goodbye to each other and felt that this war would end soon. They would be able to see their family again. They could go to their homes. And Jim McPherson said that every soldier wants peace. They don't want fights. And he also wished the same to Henswolf and said that he would never forget this moment and hoped the same from Henswolf too. He saluted and walked away from me slowly, unwillingly, I felt. He turned out to wave just once and then became one of the hundreds of grey-coated men drifting back towards their trenches. That night, back in our dugouts, we heard them singing a carol and singing it quite beautifully. It was still Nashed, silent night. Our boys gave them a rousing chorus of while shepherds watched. We exchanged carols for a while and then we all fell silent. We had our time of peace and goodwill, a time I will treasure as long as I live. So before leaving, Henswolf saluted to Jim McPherson and walked slowly towards his trench. It seemed to Jim McPherson that he didn't want to go back to his own trench. He wanted to stay a little more over there. And then when he turned, he became one of the hundreds of those foot soldiers. And at night, he mentioned that they exchanged carols, still Nashed from German side and white shepherds watched from England's side. Dearest Connie, by Christmas time next year this war will be nothing but a distant and terrible memory. I know from all that happened today how much both armies long for peace. We shall be together again soon, I'm sure of it. Your loving Jim. So he hoped to be with Connie by the next Christmas because he realized that both the armies wanted peace. They didn't want war. Until next year, this war will be nothing. It will be like a distant and terrible memory to all of them. Now that, what do you think? That Jim had been able to reach home back? Don't watch ahead. Answer this question first. Folded the letter again and slipped it carefully back into its envelope. I kept awake all night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. After reading the letter, the author couldn't sleep and decided to drive to Bridport. I drove into Bridport, just a few miles away. I asked a boy walking his dog where Cooper Beeches was, house number 12. Turned out to be nothing but a burnt-out shell, the roof gaping, the windows boarded up. So in the morning he headed to the Bridport, and which was just a few miles away from his home, and he asked a boy on the way that, do you know about the Cooper Beeches? And to this he answered that yes, it was house number 12. When he went there, he found that that house was completely burnt, the roof was gaping and the window was boarded up. Knocked at the house next door. Would anyone know the whereabouts of a Mrs. McPherson? Oh yes, I know her very well, a lovely old lady, a bit muddle-headed, but at her age she was entitled to be, wasn't she? 101 years old, she had been in this house. So when he found Mrs. McPherson's house burnt out, he knocked at the next door, and the lady over there told him that yes, she knew that lady
and she described Mrs. Macpherson as a bit muddle-headed lady because of her age, and when she was there in that house, she was 101 years old. So one could expect that when you turn up to that age, you seem to be confused, you do not seem to be a normal person. So she mentioned her as a muddle-headed lady. No one really knew how the fire had started, but it could well have been candles. She used candle rather than electricity because she always thought electricity was too expensive. The fireman had got her out just in time. She is in nursing home now, Burlington House, on the Dorchester Road on the other side of town. Then the lady told about the whereabouts of Mrs. Macpherson, and she told that she was in Burlington House, which is a nursing home on the Dorchester Road, and it was on the other side of the road. And she also mentioned the reason how her house had got burned due to the use of candles instead of electricity, considering them to be the cheap thing. I found Burlington House nursing home easily enough. There were paper chains up in the hallway, and a lighted Christmas tree stood in the corner with a lopsided angel on top. I said I was a friend come to visit Mrs. Macpherson to bring her a Christmas present. I could see through into the dining room where everyone was wearing a paper hat and singing. The matron had a hat on too and seemed happy enough to see me. She even offered me a mince pie. She walked me along to the corridor. Mrs. Macpherson is not in with the others, she told me. She's rather confused today, so we thought it best if she had a good rest. She has no family, no one visits her, so I'm sure she'll be only too pleased to see you. She took me into the conservatory with wicker chairs and potted plants all around and left me. Author could easily find out the Burlington House nursing home because he was from England itself, and when he entered the hallway of that nursing home, he found that it was decorated with paper chains, and it had a Christmas tree which was lighted up and it kept in the corner, and it had a lopsided angel on top. So when he visited over there, he mentioned the reason that he was a friend and he wanted to present Mrs. Macpherson a Christmas present. So when he reached there, he was asked to wait in the waiting lounge, and while he was waiting over there, he observed that everyone was in the dining room and they were celebrating Christmas, and they were wearing their paper hats and singing Christmas carol. He was astonished to see the matron, who was the head nurse. She was also had a hat on her head. And she also seemed very happy to see the author, and she offered him the mince pie. And then the matron walked him along the corridor and told him that Mrs. Macpherson was not in there with others because she was confused that day. So they thought that it would be better for her if she took rest. And then the matron informed author that Mrs. Macpherson would be very pleased and happy to see him because no one ever visits her. And finally they reached the room where Mrs. Macpherson was. It had a wicker chair and potted plants all around, and then she left. The old lady was sitting in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She had silver white hair pinned into a wispy bun. She was gazing out at the garden. She turned and looked up at me vacantly. So when author entered that conservatory, he found Mrs. Macpherson on the wheelchair and her hands were folded in her lap. And she had a kind of wispy bun. Her hair were pinned into a wispy bun because when you grow up, you do not have much hair on your head. You shed a lot of hair. So her bun had turned into a wispy bun, not a heavy bun, right? And she was looking out into the garden. And when she turned to see who was there in that room, she looked at author vacantly. She couldn't recognize who he was and why was he there. Hello, happy Christmas, Connie. I found this. I think it is yours. As I was speaking, her eyes never left my face. I opened the tin box and gave it to her. That was the moment her eyes lit up with recognition, and her face became suffused with a sudden glow of happiness. Reaching there, author wished her happy Christmas by her name and informed her that he found that box and he thought that it was hers because it had a name, Connie, on it. And so while he was speaking, Mrs. Macpherson was constantly looking at him. She was not taking her eyes off his face. And when he gave that box to her, her eyes lit up in recognition. Her face was full of joy. She felt elated looking at that box.
I explained about the desk, about how I had found it, but I don't think she was listening. For a while she said nothing, but stroked the letter tenderly with her fingertips. Suddenly she reached out and took my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. I went on explaining that how he had got that rolled desk in a junk shop, but after a while he realized that she wasn't listening to him. She was just striking her fingertips against that letter tenderly, and suddenly she reached out to him and she took his hand into her hands, and her eyes were filled with tears. You told me you would come home by Christmas, dearest, and here you are, the best Christmas present in the world. Come closer, Jim dear. Sit down. I read your letters so often, Jim. Every day. I wanted to hear your voice in my head. It always made me feel you were with me, and now you are here. Now you're back. Now you can read it to me yourself. Would you do that for me, Jim dear? I just wanted to hear your voice again. I would love that so much. And then perhaps we'll have some more tea. I have made you a nice Christmas cake. Marzipan all around. I know how much you love marzipan. It is quite evident after reading this paragraph that Mrs. Macpherson had taken the author as her husband Jim. So therefore she requested him to sit near her and requested him to read that letter again because she wanted to hear his voice again. And she was happy that he made his promise to come back on the Christmas day. And then she said that after you read that letter to me, we would have tea. And she told him that she had made a Christmas cake and she knew that how he loved that marzipan. So she was in a kind of another state, and she was. That's all for today. Happy studies.